especially for someone who has not heard of Convention 189 before, what would I tell that person is that if, for example, the person is Christian and he goes to church, I will kind of tell the person that, you know, if Christians have a Bible, ILO Convention 189 is some sort of a Bible for domestic workers.
El mismo convenio 189, eso nos ha dado la oportunidad de nosotros conocer y reconocer que nosotros somos una trabajadora, porque a nosotros nos pedían para trabajar en una casa, nosotros sabíamos que íbamos a trabajar, pero ellos nos decían, quiero un ayudante, quiero alguien que me acompañe, te voy a tratar como mi familia. Sí, tú eres de mi familia, pero en el momento que tú pides que te suban el salario, que te afilien al Seguro Social, pasaste de ser familia. Entonces, por lo tanto, el convenio 189 nos indica y nos ha dado herramientas prácticas y claras como para decir, somos una trabajadora.
The past few decades certainly have seen an improvement in the labor laws and policies affecting the domestic work sector. These new developments have been especially true since 2008, triggered by the ILO, so the International Labour Organization, decision to put domestic work on the agenda. And this process produced the very first international convention regulating this sector, which is called Convention number 189 concerning decent work for domestic workers, and the related recommendation 201, which have both been adopted in Geneva in June 2011 at the end of the International Labour Conference. The key message of the convention is that domestic workers should be treated as other workers in their respective countries. So the concept of equality between domestic workers and other workers. What does equality mean in the context of this convention? First of all, of course, in terms, they should be equal in terms of salary and also protection in the workplace. But also what the ILO had in mind was that this expansion, the expansion of labor rights had to go hand in hand with the creation of new forms of association, of workers' association, where possible, of trade unions formed by domestic workers themselves. Also, in addition to this level of rights at the social, political, and legal level, the ILO recommended a larger cultural change, so in the social representation of domestic workers, which, as we know in many contexts, still suffer a lot from forms of stigmatization. So I would say what the convention does is that it combines a labor rights approach with a wider struggle for the human rights of particularly vulnerable subjects, who are the most likely, people practicing this domestic work. In particular, undocumented migrants or low-caste people or racialized women. To put it another way, one can say that the convention incorporates an intersectional approach, appealing at the same time to issues of gender, race, ethnicity, but also religious and class-based discrimination at work.
Basta ya de precariedad. Queremos currar en condiciones.
It's important to note that the ILO process only came about as a result of the activism of domestic workers themselves, along with their allies. In some contexts, organizing for domestic workers' rights preceded the convention, and in any case was not the result of any initiatives of ILO or, for that matter, any other organization based in the global north. in particular, some domestic workers movements based in the Global South had a lot to teach, and in fact have still a lot to teach to organizations in other parts of the world. They have a lot to teach in terms of organizing and alliance making, but also I would say in terms of radical critiques that they have produced. Let's think about the topic of reproduction inequalities, but also the care crisis, for example. These networks were and still are very active in Latin America and in Asia. And these activists contributed directly to the passing of the Convention 189 in Geneva in 2011. And it's important to remember that they did so in very original and unconventional ways.
Então, gente, essas mulheres foi muito importante, porque a gente sai do Brasil não sabendo falar a nossa língua, e todo mundo sabe que Genebra é muito difícil, as coisas, é muito caro, e a gente teve apoio do governo, e também tivemos um apoio muito importante que foi da central sindical, porque se a gente não tivesse a central sindical, a CUT, a gente jamais poderia entrar lá.
So it is a 2-year process, and in 2010, actually we managed already quite well that domestic workers were included into the national delegations of the trade unions, but we could feel at the same time a lot of hostility among trade unions. The same a little bit with the governments, and because everybody in the room had somehow also personal experiences with domestic workers.
As discussões foram, em 2010, as discussões foram muito difíceis, porque tinha o empregador lá que ele não aceitava as nossas condições. Mas o Brasil, ele fez um papel muito importante, sendo que em 2011 a gente voltou, e aí já estava mais acessível a situação. Mas nós tivemos também apoio de vários outros países, como a África do Sul, que sempre esteve do lado do Brasil.
I do firmly believe it did make a difference to have these women at the table, and I could see also from some officials in the ILO that they really appreciated this contribution.
Então, quando a gente conseguiu de tanta luta, porque a gente ficava até de noite lutando quando conseguimos, que a última pergunta, que não teve adendo, que foi conquistada e que ele bateu o martelo, isso foi uma alegria muito grande para a gente. A gente não cumpriu as regras que existem lá, que não pode gritar, não pode pular, não pode bater palma, não pode fazer nada. Mas aí a alegria foi tão grande que a gente descumpriu essas regras e conseguimos festejar.
And at that time, the women, they just went downstairs. They were dancing, they were singing, they were hugging every delegate who was coming through the room. It was just an atmosphere you experience only once in a lifetime.
Ha cambiado la ley, eso está fatal. Nos han bajado el sueldo y hay más precariedad. Levántate, empleada del hogar, lucha por tus derechos y visibilidad.
En el momento de la ratificación del convenio, créalo que eso fue lo más lindo que pudo haber para nosotras, porque, perdón, que esto siempre me motiva, porque en realidad era una cosa muy linda que nosotros teníamos, porque sabíamos que era la forma de poder echar abajo, como decimos nosotras, todas las explotaciones laborales. Y eso nos permitió a poder ir mejorando, ir conociendo, ¿sí? Y créanlo, como digo, en realidad fue lo más divino que nosotros tuvimos en ese momento. Todas, porque sabíamos que era una herramienta para poder mejorar las condiciones laborales de nuestro sector. Y eso pues ahí es donde ya nacen las luchas mucho más profundas, ¿sí? Mucho más profundas en el sentido de que ya se vayan cumpliendo como la afiliación al seguro social, las 8 horas de trabajo, trabajar de lunes a viernes, y que las mujeres gocen del 13º o 14º sueldo que no lo teníamos anteriormente. Entonces, eso para nosotros, pues hubo un cambio, y esos cambios verdaderamente, valga la redundancia, son profundos.
Well, I won't say it's been perfect, but we really have had a lot of great strides in promoting decent work for domestic workers because of ILO Convention 189 and its accompanying law, our local law, the Batas Kasambahay. For instance, the law established that within a period of 1 week, a domestic worker should have 1 full day of rest. And during that 1 full day of rest, he or she has all the right to do whatever he or she wants.
Tanto a convenção quanto a lei complementar 150, no nosso entender, ainda tem a convenção pelo fato de que ela tem que se adaptar às leis do país que a ratifica, né? Ela é perfeita, mas no papel, porque na realidade ela tem que se adaptar aos países que ratifica a convenção.
Perdonen mi risa, pero me toca reírme porque yo actualmente como representante de UTRASD hago parte de la mesa de concertación de seguimiento al convenio 189, convenio que Colombia tiene ratificado hace 6 años exactamente, y que este convenio, si bien es un convenio macro, una sombrilla grande, como le llamo cariñosamente, una sombrilla grande que podía amparar todos los derechos de las trabajadoras domésticas, es claro que en Colombia el 189 no ha tenido una implementación correcta. Si bien, por un lado, adoptan un convenio, ratifican un convenio que es un convenio amplio, un convenio incluyente, por otro lado, no son coherentes con estos convenios.
Porém, nem todos os empregadores têm a consciência cidadã de respeitar isso. Então, por isso que a nossa luta é uma constante para que a gente possa garantir esse trabalho, essa lei ser aplicada de forma que ela realmente contemple aquilo para qual ela foi criada, que é garantir direito para as trabalhadoras domésticas no Brasil.
Since its enactment in Geneva in 2011, the convention has continued to represent a motor for change globally. And today, as of April 2021, it counts 31 ratifications, most of them by countries in the global south and to a less extent in the global north. But beyond numbers, what matters is how the convention has been taken up in different countries and what changes it has promoted at the legislative and the cultural levels. And actually, we can observe an impact of the convention, both in ratifying and non-ratifying countries. And we can say that the recognition of rights for domestic workers from this transnational level has filtered down to the local context in different ways. And international standards and global campaigns for domestic workers have been received, have been appropriated, or even resisted in different ways by the local actors who mobilize for domestic workers' rights. Today, 10 years after the adoption of C189, we see that the campaigns for the ratification continue all over the world, but at the same time, even in countries that ratified the convention, its actual implementation is still far from being achieved. And for these reasons, the domestic workers' organizations and their allies are fighting hard for it to become reality and not only remain a beautiful declaration of intent on paper.
el momento de hablar muy claro. Cambia el concepto de los cuidados. No es solo el trapo y la cocina, es todo el curro que hace que gire la vida misma.